Mara Ashvale arrived at the Grand Conclave Hall carrying a worn leather satchel, a small notebook, and nothing else. No escort walked beside her. No banner announced her name. No warriors stood at her back with their chests puffed out and their jaws set hard, the way the other delegates had arrived. She stepped through the great stone doors of the hall the same way she did everything, quietly, without announcement, without asking the room to notice her. The hall was enormous. Carved stone columns rose from the floor to a ceiling so high that torchlight barely reached it. Long tables stretched from one end of the room to the other, draped in deep burgundy cloth. Pack leaders sat in their ceremonial seats, their councils fanned out behind them. Warriors lined the walls. Scribes from the Shifter Chronicle moved between the rows with small recording devices, capturing everything for the official record. Mara found a seat near the back of the hall, close to the wall, between a potted olive tree and an empty chair. She set her satchel down on the floor beside her feet, opened her notebook to a blank page, and uncapped her pen. She was small, 5 feet and 1 inch on a generous morning. She wore a plain linen robe, the kind that cost very little and washed easily. Her hair was pinned back with a wooden clip. She looked, one council aide would later admit, like someone who had taken a wrong turn and ended up in the wrong room. She had not taken a wrong turn. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. The Grand Conclave happened once every 10 years. It was the most important gathering in the shifter world, a summit where pack leaders presented their records, alliances were sealed or broken, and the Elder Council met to decide who among the gathered would receive the Mark of Honor. The mark was the highest recognition the council could give. It had been awarded only 19 times in 300 years. Mara had been registered as an attendee for 8 months. She was listed on the official manifest as Mara Ashvale, Omega Class, Ashvale Borderline. She had sent her documentation in on time, paid the attendance fee herself, and received her confirmation letter without ceremony. No one had called to verify her credentials. No one had written to ask what she planned to present. She was an Omega. There were certain assumptions that came with that, and the people who made those assumptions rarely felt the need to check them. She was writing a note to herself when King Caden Drave entered the hall. The room changed the moment he walked through the door. It was not dramatic. No one shouted or bowed with theatrical flair. It was subtler than that. Conversations dropped to murmurs. Backs straightened. The air in the room seemed to pull slightly toward him, the way everything in a space adjusts when something with real gravity enters it. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in deep charcoal ceremonial wear, with silver detailing at the collar and cuffs. His dark hair was cut close on the sides and left longer at the top. His face was composed, not cold, exactly, but arranged in the particular expression of a man who had long since stopped being surprised by his own importance. His council flanked him in a clean formation, 4 on each side, all of them moving with the practiced coordination of people who had spent years learning to match his pace. He was 34 years old and had been Alpha King for 9 years. His pack was the largest on the continent. His territory had expanded in every direction during his reign. He had never lost a formal challenge. He was, by every measure the world knew how to take, the most powerful person in the room. He took his seat at the head table. His council arranged itself around him. One of his aides, a young man with wire-framed glasses, leaned forward to set a glass of water on the table and misjudged the angle. He stumbled, caught himself, and in catching himself, knocked into the corner of Mara's satchel, where it sat on the floor near the aisle's edge. The satchel did not fall. It barely moved, but the sound was enough for Caden to look over. He saw the satchel. Then he saw Mara, sitting behind it with her notebook open and her pen in her hand. He looked at her, the way people look at something that doesn't quite fit the picture, with a brief, easy, uncomplicated assessment. And then he laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly. Just a short, light sound that passed through his nose and the corner of his mouth, the kind of laugh that doesn't even fully commit to itself. "Did someone bring their grandmother's herbalist?" he said, pitching the words just loud enough for his nearest council members to hear. 2 of them smiled. 1 looked away. The aide with the glasses stared very hard at the floor. Mara did not look up. She wrote 1 more word in her notebook, capped her pen, and rested her hands in her lap. The conclave opened. Pack leaders presented their records, one by one, called up in order of rank. The presentations were numerical: warriors trained, acres of territory managed, treaties secured, population growth recorded. Each leader had a team of data specialists who had spent months preparing charts and summaries and projected figures for the decade ahead. King Caden's presentation lasted 22 minutes. His numbers were extraordinary. His pack had trained more than 4,000 new warriors in the past decade. His territory had grown by 30%. His medical facilities had treated hundreds of thousands of patients. His economic output had tripled. The room listened with the particular attention people give to something that confirms what they already believed. The presentations continued through the afternoon and into the early evening. Mara's slot was listed third from the end, a low honor position, assigned without much thought to those the organizers considered minor attendees. When her name was called, she stood, walked to the front of the hall, and set her notebook on the podium. She did not have a team. She did not have charts. She had 4 handwritten pages of notes, and a voice that was calm and even, and carried well enough across the stone hall. She did not begin with numbers. She began with a place. Duskfen Settlement, she said. 16 families, 212 residents. 6 years ago, they had a child mortality rate of 40% and an adult illness rate that made sustainable population impossible. They were on the extinction registry. She paused and turned a page. They are no longer on the registry. Last year, their population grew by 31 people. They have a functioning clinic, a trained local healer, and a soil recovery program that has made them agriculturally self-sufficient for the first time in their recorded history. She listed 7 more settlements after that. Each one had a name, a history, and an outcome. Each one had been, at some point in the past decade, considered unsalvageable. Each one was now stable. She had spent 10 years moving between them on foot and by supply truck. She had trained 200 local healers, not specialists flown in from headquarters, but people who already lived in those communities, who already knew the terrain and the families, and the particular ways that grief and illness moved through a small, isolated population. She had developed a treatment protocol for a condition called omega-linked stress syndrome, a real, documented illness that caused systemic immune collapse in omega-class shifters under chronic social pressure. The medical establishment had acknowledged the condition for decades and done almost nothing about it. Her protocol had now been adopted by 11 clinics across the continent. She had funded all of it herself: herb sales, traded labor, and 3 years of living in a borrowed canvas tent. She spoke for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. She thanked the council for the time. She walked back to her seat near the back of the hall. The room was quiet in a way it had not been quiet all day. King Caden did not look at Mara. He looked at the table in front of him. Then he leaned toward his chief advisor, a sharp-minded older man named Rector, and said something in a low voice. Rector did not smile back. During the evening recess, while the hall buzzed with conversation and the catering staff moved quietly between the tables, King Caden crossed the room. His council watched from a distance. A few nearby delegates tracked him with their eyes. He stopped beside Mara's chair. She looked up. He told her, in a tone that was more curious than unkind, that what she had described was impressive. For someone working independently. He asked who had funded the later stages, which corporate PAC sponsor, which government health body, which alliance had quietly backed the effort. Mara told him there was no sponsor. He said he found that difficult to believe. She told him she understood. She thanked him for coming over. She looked back at her notebook. He stood there for one more moment, then walked away. He did not see, because he was not looking in that direction, that Elder Sova had watched the entire exchange from her seat at the council table, near the far wall. Elder Sova was the oldest member of the Elder Council. She was 89 years old, and her arthritis had progressed to the point where standing was painful and slow, and something she only did when she had decided it was absolutely necessary. She watched King Caden walk away. She watched Mara return to her notebook. She was quiet for a long time after that. The final session of the Grand Conclave began the following morning. It was the Mark of Honor ceremony. The hall was at full attendance, every seat filled, every delegate in their formal regalia, every camera from the Shifter Chronicle positioned and ready. The mark was typically awarded to a pack leader. It had never been awarded to an Omega. In the 300-year history of the conclave, it had never come particularly close. The 7 elders sat at the long ceremonial table at the front of the hall. Their robes were white with gold trim at the edges. The youngest of them was 67. The oldest was Sova. Elder Sova was given the honor of speaking first, as she had been at every conclave for 30 years. She did not begin with the announcement, as was tradition. She began with a story. She told the room about Duskfen settlement. She described what it had looked like 6 years ago. The empty houses, the sick children, the exhausted adults who had already started making the kinds of quiet decisions people make when they believe there is no future coming. She described what it looked like now. Then she described the woman who had walked into Duskfen alone, with seeds, medicines, and a notebook. And then Elder Sova put both hands flat on the table in front of her, braced her weight, and stood up. It took her a moment. It was visibly difficult. The hall was completely silent as she rose. Not the silence of indifference, but the silence of a room that understood. It was watching something that cost something. When she was fully upright, she looked at the table to her left. The second elder, a man named Oren who had a cane leaning against his chair, met her eyes. He picked up his cane, positioned it carefully, and stood. Then the third elder stood. Then the fourth. The fifth and sixth rose together, slowly, one of them steadied by an aide who moved quickly and quietly to her side. The seventh, a woman who had not left her chair unassisted in 3 years, stood with both hands gripped on the arms of her seat and did not sit back down. All 7 elders were standing before Mara's name was spoken. The hall did not react immediately. It took several seconds, long, suspended seconds, where the room was simply absorbing what it had just seen. 7 elders, all of them in some degree of physical difficulty, all of them standing, all of them looking in the same direction. Mara Ashvale, Elder Sova said, of the Ashvale borderline. The sound that followed was not quite a cheer, and not quite applause. It was something in between, a release, the way a room breathes out after it has been holding its breath without realizing it. King Caden Drave was on his feet before anyone in his council. He did not stand the way he had stood when he entered the hall the previous day, composed, deliberate, aware of the picture he made. He stood the way a person stands when something has happened that they were not prepared for, when something true has arrived, without giving them time to arrange their response to it. His chair scraped back. His council looked at him, then followed, then the row in front of him, then the rest of the hall, in that spreading wave that moves through a standing crowd, when one person breaks first, and the rest follow. Mara walked to the front of the hall. Elder Sova took the mark of honor, a silver sigil on a small velvet pad, and pressed it gently to Mara's wrist, holding it there for the 3 seconds the ceremony required. Mara said thank you in a voice that was steady. She walked back through the hall while it was still standing. Outside the ceremony chamber, in the long stone corridor that led to the main doors, King Caden found her. He had moved quickly, or perhaps she had moved slowly, still absorbing the weight of the morning. Either way, he reached her in the corridor before she reached the doors. He stood in front of her and said nothing at first. She waited. He told her that he owed her an apology, not for the numbers, not for questioning the funding, not for his skepticism, because skepticism was reasonable. He owed her an apology for the laugh, for the small, careless sound he had made when he looked at her sitting near the back of the hall in her plain linen robe, and decided, without a single piece of information, what she was and what she was worth. He told her that was a harder thing to admit than losing a formal challenge. Mara looked at him for a moment. She told him that it was a start. She put her notebook into her satchel, adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and walked out through the main doors into the late morning light. King Caden stood in the corridor for a long moment after she had gone. His chief advisor Rector appeared at his elbow, as Rector always did, and stood quietly beside him. After a while, Caden said, "How long had she been doing this work before anyone outside those settlements knew her name?" Rector checked his notes. "Approximately 9 years," he said. Caden nodded slowly. 9 years, he said, more to himself than to Rector. And I laughed. Rector said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. Outside, the morning was clear and bright. Mara Ashvale walked toward the car park with the mark of honor on her wrist and her notebook in her bag, already thinking about the settlement she was returning to next week, already planning what she would carry in and what she would need to learn once she arrived. The world had finally caught up to what she had always already been. She had not waited for it. She had simply continued.